All right, welcome everybody. This is the community meeting for KubeVirt, August 8th, 2018. We're going to kick things off with device plugins from Roman. That was a topic of discussion last week, and just kind of a follow-up here, if we could. He is here.
So someone put something for me on the agenda, and I should talk about something?
Yeah, sorry about that. It was just in terms of the follow-up from the device plugins discussion, not everybody was able to take part in the follow-up. So if we could just briefly recap what was the outcome of
that. The outcome, there isn't really an outcome. Can you hear me? Oh. Hello?
Yes, go on.
Okay, now you can. So I created a few pull requests to outline on how I would see the things. And right now, for a few things like KVM and so on, like for mandatory devices, the pull requests get rid of device plugins. And then on top of that, there is another question there's another pull request which tries to bring privileged setup stuff to the right location regarding to the KubeVirt architecture, but so should happen Virt Handler and Virt Launcher. And then I have a final pull request, which is basically up completely for discussion on how to integrate external device plugins. For instance, for networking or whatever.
I'm afraid that I have not reviewed your patches yet. Dan Koenigsberg. Maybe you'd like to give a review right now about what the gist behind them.
So the gist behind them is that until device plugins are more have a more clear API, and can, for instance, be used for indefinite resources like KVM or so on, there is not really an advantage for something like passing that KVM into the pod with all the overhead which comes with it, and it has it makes it harder for developers and for operators right now from my perspective. And there is, of course, a demand in the future to use device plugins for different stuff, especially if some changes are getting in there regarding to the API. So I want to also make sure that the architecture, like for instance, that privileged operations can happen in Virt Handler and not Virt Launcher in the future when device plugins come in. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, I understand that this is like the motivation of why you didn't like Yuval's patch, but I just wanted to hear more about what you do like about your own POC or suggestion.
So it's extremely simple. We already have, and it has a lot to do with the current limitations of the device plugins like they are right now. We already have a socket between Virt Handler and every Virt Launcher that's needed for us to communicate with it. And because of that, that gives us a stable API to find out everything about the pod itself and the container where the VM should run in. And with this information, we can then, with our privileged Virt Handler, do all privileged operations to full extent. Like, for instance, a device plugin brings in a VETH pair or a bridge, and then Virt Handler can take over from there and take that bridge and connect it in specific different ways to the VMs, and that are very often still privileged operations. And if we do this in Virt Launcher, we can't really remove privileges from the Virt Launcher container and can't centralize them. Also, Virt Launcher then contains logic, which especially right now, would be synchronized with the device plugins. Whereas for the other thing, we can provide an interface in Virt Handler, which is much easier to maintain for us. Is it better now?
I'm not sure that I understand. Okay, I understood that you are now using the KubeVirt API between launcher and handler
Yeah.
to pass the network devices, to attach network devices into the pod.
Roman,
True.
you allow me, I think maybe I can help Dan.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the difficulties that we had in the original device plugin was to figure out what is the namespace of the pod, right? Because this is the namespace to which we need to move or to create the bridge and all that stuff, right? So there are kind of a couple of workarounds that we had to add in our device plugin to figure out what is the right namespace. And this is very easy between the Virt launcher and the Virt handler because they have an API between them, which doesn't exist between the device plugin and the Virt launcher. And also on the other side of the API, again, we had to craft our own API between the device plugin and the Virt launcher. And I mean, it's not something complex, but I agree with Roman that the Virt launcher should not be acting as an API entry point for our system.
True. Let me just add here. In the future, if there, I think right now you can even pass in environment variables or so from the device plugin. So we still, device plugins in the future could offer something like that to Virt launcher, and then still Virt handler can extract that information if there is a well-known interface or something. That's completely fine, also from my perspective. The important part is really that we have, one of the important parts, apart from what Yuval said, is really that we have a Virt handler knows how to connect to a VI, connect from a device to the VM at the end, and that is very often privileged.
So, I wasn't there for the discussion last week, but I was able to catch up a little bit with the discussion. So, from my perspective, what I see is that we talked a lot about what the device plugin, some people were speaking about, including me, should deliver. So the layer 2 functionality, and I think that that is still valid, what it provides. But what we missed is to really deepen the discussion about how the integration with KubeVirt is looking. Because I think to the people who were working on the networking side, it looked pretty straightforward. So now we see that there are concerns on the integration side. So what I'm proposing is actually, let's have a document to focus only on the integration and interactions between the device plugin and KubeVirt, so how we can integrate them. Because it looks like the existing PRs are not enough or not the right platform to discuss this. So what I would prefer is to exchange thoughts, is to have a design document or something like that, where we can outline the specific flows we have, how the integration looks in detail, how the information is passed from what component to what component is responsible for what, and what implication that has to the VM API, but also to other APIs.
I think, I mean, that what we are missing, I mean, what I'm missing is an understanding what exactly is the device plugin API is missing to be properly used by KubeVirt. So we could, I mean, I would like that the device plugin knows to which container it needs to attach, to which pod it needs to attach the device. This is...
So I can jump in a little bit here and kind of clarify. You asked what's missing in terms of just device plugins and what makes it unsuitable. So one of the problems is that, well, when you do a device advertisement at the host level, that's fine. But if Virt handler doesn't boot up for any reason at all, every error that could possibly manifest shows up as a device plugins error. So it kind of masks real issues, and they just show up as can't schedule the pod, sorry. We're unable to assign file ownership to device nodes because the framework provided by Kubernetes only makes the path exist. It's owned by root. And if that's not appropriate, there's no way to change that. And you're going to need privileges in order to correct that. You're going, when the device is created at the Virt handler level, and this is something you just touched on at the very end of your question, there's no context inside the device plugin about which pod the device is assigned to. When you have a direct connection between Virt handler and Virt launcher, if there's a special understanding that's needed, that's already present because you have that socket and that connection.
Yeah, and that goes a lot into the device plugin discussion, because one
Yeah.
could say it's a question if device plugins should know the pod, the namespaces, what it should operate on, or if we look at today's device plugin API, then the device plugin does not know anything about the pods or where they live.
Yeah,
it's
but
rather
we-
exposing the resource to get that passed over.
So maybe a comment about that. Maybe Sebastian can chime in. So for example, there is an example of using device plugin in conjunction with the Maltus CNI, where the device plugin is used only for the resource handling. So the only thing the device plugin does is does the discovery of the resource and tell how many instances of each, like this is a bounded resource because it's in for SRIV, so it's not unbounded. So it's a bounded resource, and the only thing that device plugin does is does the discovery, checks how many instances or virtual functions there is on the node, and publish that. And the actual work and API and communication is not done by the device plugin. So, you know, all the information that we think that device plugin in such a case should transfer to whomever needs the resource is not done by the device plugin. It's done by the Malta CNI that supports SRIV. And the only use of device plugin here is that Kubernetes knows how to schedule things smartly where the resources exist, and that's it. So in this case, the API is done elsewhere. So that might be like maybe a valid approach of using a device plugin just for what they are, and the CNI with the CRD, the network special CRD attachment, network attachment CRD.
Okay, this brings us to Sebastian's current implementation that does not use a device plugin at all, just use Multus, and we might want to integrate it with some kind of device plugin where they are being used just like smart labels that each host knows how many labels are there. Just
the device plugin is only used to know how much resource you have, because with the SRIOV, it's not unlimited interfaces you can connect.
Yeah, understood. But also, in my perspective, also bandwidth is a limited resource that you'd like. You could use device plugin to allocate smartly.
Yeah, exactly.
But what you're saying that a device plugin should not be used to. I mean, when we are using, for example, vGPU, to which the device plugin was invented, it was not just reporting what's out there; it also passing the specific like
Device
carving
in, yeah.
the view and passing it to a specific
Yeah.
pod.
And
But
that's,
you
for
want that
instance,
the second part would not happen with network devices.
and for instance, right now, network devices don't have a path, or at least some don't have one, right? And so you're then creating a fake device which you pass to Kubernetes so that it has to create something. And I think all those things we now said lead to the situation for us right now that we have to bring in a lot of hacks, we bring a lot of extra infrastructure, maybe extra daemon sets, all the extra socket connections to the kubelet, and have to maintain that. And then we get even errors like no TAN device available, whatever that means, not sufficient TAN devices available, so on. So because all the messages are misleading because they're for limited devices only. And I think that's a huge amount of hacks right now just to provide something which doesn't really fit at the moment. And therefore, I want,
what I'm trying to reverse the question is to understand if I can fill up a shopping cart for device plugin guys and tell them, what do we want from their API so it could be usable for network devices too? That's
is that something which Fabian and Petr maybe already have? Is Petr on the call?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes and no. There are several iterations of that. The thing is, and that is why I'm a fan of really getting it premature into KubeVirt, is to gain hands-on experience. The problem is that a lot of the semantics are not defined, like that number. It is not clear. I mean, could be a simple integer, which is, where you remove some quantity and dedicate it to a pod. What I try to say is, it's very hard to define a shopping cart if we are for ourselves not clear how we imagine the right solution to look. And to get to the right solution, I'm a fan of getting hands-on and having real-world experience what is helping us. And that is why I'm so hard for pushing to get device plugins in so that we know how we want it to be and how it is right, to get more first-hand experience and not write it or invent it from scratch, but to have reliable data.
And that is where I say we can do that. I'm happy with having the integration point with device plugins, but if it should be usable too, it's too early for it.
And I'm proposing to have a design document to really sort out the situation, how the integration can look. Because I understand the concerns, but I still would like to move forward with it.
Who should own that design document?
I think it can be done by for example, Peter and Yuval, and to lay out. I mean, it's a continuation of the PRs from Roman and Yuval, and find the right way, which is a compromise to both sides, not a compromise necessarily, which is a solution which is acceptable to both sides. Yuval, Peter, is that something, and Dan, you can take care of to take Roman's PR and Yuval's PR and sort, and by reading both to understand how an integration could look, effectively taking all concerns into account?
I would like to build such a shopping cart. I mean, for what I want from a device plugin. Yes, that's my hope to create.
I can actually find you a document where I tried to create that shopping cart some time ago. I'll share it in a moment. Or I'll share it offline.
Sorry, so the idea is that once you're really kind of have a good understanding, good grasp of what's needed, go and try to add that to the upstream, to Kubernetes?
Oh yes, I think that's our goal. I mean, we know the device plugin API is not suited for network devices currently for several reasons. I mean, I think there are, for several reasons. And in the discussion in upstream, if you look at the mailing list and the meeting notes and so on of the resource management working group and Zig Network Plumbing working group, we see over the last year, there was always a discussion what the right approach is. And nobody really tried it out. And that is why no best practice appeared.
And it is explicitly outside of the de facto standard for network. We know that we need to support the integration with device plugin, but we are not doing it here.
Yeah, because it's a world of flames. Not so nice, but like Europe these days, with so many fires, which is really sad. But and that is where we want to make progress. And we don't see any acceptance if we try to theoretically argue what could fly.
Yeah, but just to highlight, I was not suggesting to not allow having device plugins. So
yes.
I'm completely happy with if the networking teams continues with the plugins and got the serial use data, but just make sure that it's only then that we don't only expect that users use it when it really is major.
Yes, and that's why I proposed a design document to sort out how an acceptable integration can look, because we saw that the current suggestion was maybe too harsh. It didn't take the concerns into account. And there are other objections on your PR, but that's okay. I think design document is good because then we can have the ground to discuss what an acceptable solution can be. And then I think as part of that document, we can start to outline that shopping cart, like, device gRPC awareness for netlink devices, for example, or file ownership, like Stu mentioned. These are the things that we should point out and what it would be good to have in order to make our solution, our integration, optimally integrated on the long run with device plugins. So in other words, what we would require from the device plugin API in order to have
to mention it in the de facto standard for networks.
Yeah, I think that's orthogonal, but yes.
I would love each network to be able to say, for this network, I want a resource of a specific class. And that's basically it.
And the complexity increases with the resource classes, for example, which are also being developed, because then we can model stuff like this logical network, red, for example, is backed by these resources, where resource can be a classical netlink device, it can be a file pointer, because that can be used for, I don't know, for better efficiency, it can be shared memory, because DPTK is using that. So I'm saying the topic is complex. And my gist is, I don't want, sorry, oh, hey, Alex, I don't want to wait until we solve all the problems, because there's so many of them. And I would love to see that we make small progress in order to iterate to a good solution on both sides, KubeVirt and Kubernetes. That's important to me.
We also have latent configuration on network devices that are only discovered at runtime. So like after KubeVirt brings up a VM via the domain XML hooks that you guys developed, we discover some latent network device modifications like multi-queue stuff. I'm not sure exactly it would be easily expressed with just the device plugin approach.
What do you mean a latent network device? Excuse me, I don't know the term.
So the way device plugin works, as far as I understand it, is it's basically added to the pod namespace a priori before the compute container, basically the VM starts running.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying after on the webhooks, sorry, not the webhooks, on the hooks API that KubeVirt has, basically on the domain XML, we can tell the network interface extra properties before we start up, basically through libvirt. What I'm saying is that some of those properties are not necessarily available to the device plugin and are only available at runtime.
Why the libvirt is built before runtime?
So it's the configuration.
Sorry?
I think what Alexander tried, or let me try to put in my words and to make sure I understand correctly, Alexander, is the order of availability of resources provided by device plugins in relationship to the hooks we introduced, right? So that at the point where hooks are run, not necessarily all device plugin resources are available.
Okay. Yes, basically the device is already added to the pod. Basically, like Kubernetes has already allocated the device and added it to your container, and it's like ready, quote unquote, to be used. But there's configurations about it that.
Yeah, but these are not resources.
Yeah. So, what I mean. Sorry for interrupting here, but I think we see that topic is complex, and I think that is what we've seen for the last year, that we keep iterating over it.
But I would like to understand the caveat here, because as I see it, I mean, we had one option was for whomever defines the VM, writing down which resources it requires. Or the other idea that Peter had for admission controller that translates a network name to the resource that implements it. And as I see it, the admission controller can hop in after the DOM XML is already defined. So it could take the DOM XML into consideration and require specific resources only if they are like based on the hooks.
No, the admission controller is run on the cluster level. And DOM XML is only node level thing.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah.
The DOM XML is built on after the scheduling took place?
Yeah, sure.
Why do okay, because we need to allocate specific devices then.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, concerns like what you have, Alexander, and how that affects also the device plugin, that's also which we need to capture somewhere. And maybe such a design document which was specifically speaking about the integration might raise or make those, might be a good place to summarize that, because currently we don't have it.
I would need an example of such a resource that is required by the DOM XML and not known ahead of time.
I'm happy to give feedback to the design document when you guys send a link to the mailing list. Yeah.
We'll start it. So let me see.
All right. I mean, at this point, this is an important discussion, which is why we've spent half the time slot here on it. but I think we might want to move on to the next topic here, which, Fabian, a couple of weeks ago, you had put down a note for opinionated KubeVirt, but we haven't had a chance to discuss that yet. So I just wanted to give you that chance.
Yeah. So yeah, it's actually it's similar. So no, it was spawned a little bit by the device plugin discussion, but not only. So the thing is that KubeVirt isn't out on Kubernetes, but Kubernetes can be set up in many ways. So we just saw on the Slack channel that somebody tried to run KubeVirt with Calico as a backend, network backend, and he had some issues with connectivity. So right, but that is about Kubernetes. I'm more speaking about KubeVirt. So for KubeVirt, for example, we also have some variations. So currently we have, what do I try to say? For KubeVirt, for example, we have CDI, which can help us to provision PVCs. And we might have a layer 2 plugin, device plugin, which provides us network functionality. And all of that could be meshed together to provide a specific distribution of KubeVirt with opinionated set of components. Because after all, you don't need CDI and you don't need the layer 2 plugin. But on the other hand, we could form a set of valuable tools together in one entity in order to make the deployment for users more easy. Also, and that already affects us today, independent of these additional tools like CDI and the L2 plugin, stuff like updating or removing KubeVirt is already not easy. And I wonder if thus an operator, which can be opinionated to some degree, could help us to resolve the installation and removal of KubeVirt and delivering additional components to users. Because currently we have KubeVirt Ansible, which is doing this job to some degree for OpenShift, and an operator would be a more, I think, a more native way or more traceable way to do this stuff. It would also fit in with the operator framework, like with the operator lifecycle manager and so on. We actually started on that. I think back then my thoughts were really more about if we want. I mean, that we have one need an operator is clear. I think my question back then was if such an operator should be opinionated about additional components like CDI, like the L2 plugin. I think that was my core question.
I like that idea. I do like that idea. I would like, I think, have we already decided to start making a proof of concept for an operator?
Yes, actually, Michael, are you on the call? Mark is on PTO. He looked at it, and Michael Henriksen also did.
I think we should start really simple. Just get to install and deprovision KubeVirt, so we don't have to. But I do think that makes sense to wrap CDI and other dependencies into that operator.
Yes. So Mark and I looked at it a little bit. The operator framework, well, the operator SDK, as it's currently set up, and the operator framework and the OLM, it seems to me that it's really about installing, applications in basically multiple instances of applications in multiple namespaces. And since KubeVirt is kind of a cluster singleton, it didn't fit in super nicely. It has a lot of cluster scoped resources that you're not supposed to create in operators. It just seemed to be like KubeVirt is kind of this single cluster-wide service, and operator SDK and operator framework are about installing isolated instances of your application in different namespaces.
Is this an immaturity or a lack of maturity on the operator framework's part? Like, is this something that potentially will grow into?
I think it may be something else. It seems like they have a philosophy document, and it seems like their whole philosophy is everything the operator does should be scoped to a single namespace, and there shouldn't be any kind of, other than the CRD, which is a global thing, which, by the way, the operators aren't supposed to install the CRDs. That's handled by some other, something in the OLM that hasn't actually quite been figured out yet. It seems to me that the philosophy of the operators is about installing these applications in isolated namespaces so that, you know, they can do chargeback and kind of things like that. When you're installing, when your operator's essentially installing, like, you know, cluster roles or things that span multiple namespaces, it makes it harder to manage things. Like, one of the hard things to manage with our application is like the sub resources API thing. You know, if the idea of the operator framework is we could have multiple KubeVirt API servers running, and each API server would handle requests for a specific namespace, essentially. You know, we can't have multiple instances of the API server running.
What are some of their flagship use cases? Like, are they just talking about installing a Mongo database or something like that?
Yeah, their flagship use cases are install memcached in your namespace. Have as many of them as you like, and you know that's not really a, you know, that fits really nicely into it. It's install, you know, whatever, you know, MySQL or Postgres in a limited way in your namespace. Doesn't really interact with any kind of global sort of stuff.
Okay.
Also, David, quota management, we would use that too, I think. So, for example, like the web team at Akamai would want like some VMs for them to use that are separate in terms of accounting from like the platform or whatever other departments. So you know, and then it gives us different failure domains. Like if a set of things fail in a particular namespace via label selectors in Kubernetes, they might not necessarily affect other namespaces at the hardware level. That's one use case for us too.
I see.
So, Mike, those were good insights. On the other end, I know that the operator guys are looking at supporting add-ons because infrastructure enhancements or running infrastructure on Kubernetes becomes a thing. So I would consider it to be a shortcoming at the current time, just like the limited gRPC API of device plugins. So to me, it would be interesting to work with them, because stuff like installing CRDs, I think that's the crucial thing which operators need to do, because they are there to install cloud native applications which are built around CRDs eventually. So I would see that we speak to them and understand it more and understand their commitment to supporting add-ons like KubeVirt is. Because after all, I don't see a lot of opportunities, and the benefits of having something like a lifecycle manager around it looks really beneficial.
Yeah, I really want to get us off of requiring Ansible or something like that to give the whole ecosystem of KubeVirt and install the whole ecosystem of KubeVirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think we should work with them to kind of get what we need.
Yeah, because a general statement, I think there's so much hot air, no, not hot air, but there's so much fuss around Kubernetes that a lot of stuff is work in progress. And I think let's speak to the people to understand their intention and see where they go, because after all, we know they have limited resources just like we have. So they might just not have gotten to it. But to me, it's important to understand if their vision is what we have, and then we can consider if we still step back from it if they have a different vision for stuff. And it's the same for device plugins, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think we could, you know, I think from my understanding of their vision, we could change the way KubeVirt is installed to, you know, basically have API servers that listen for only operations on certain namespaces, have basically all these components, like rather than listening for new CRDs on every namespace, listen on specific namespaces. You could have the operator, the OLM, we basically have kind of the OLM manage our CRDs, like virtual machine instance, like those CRDs, and kind of, but we'd be changing the way we kind of install things from going from like a cluster singleton to like a more a deployment per namespace or whatever.
We have some components, like for example, CDI, that work across namespaces. So it's they actually have an operation where they're doing cloning on PVCs across two namespaces. So things like that wouldn't really mesh well, even if we could consider that ability to just install per namespace.
Yeah, and I think let's speak to them and then let's see what they have to say. Because after all, I'm quite sure that they really aim at supporting add-ons, and there must be something for it.
All right. Well, it sounds like the discussion is sort of tapering off on that topic. So moving on to the next, we have some changes to our CI infrastructure afoot. And Roman.
We, as said before, I think already in the meeting, we had to migrate off from our OCI infrastructure. We have a new OCI infrastructure, which is also used by KubeVirt. And most of the jobs are now running there. There's just one Windows test lane running there. We will make sure that Windows is really working with KubeVirt, which will hopefully migrate it off to this week. And the most important visible part is that the logs look different and that you have to run CI test please instead of retest this please. That's it.
Thank you for making those changes. That was probably not easy.
And next up, just a quick note, like to give everybody a heads up about virtual machine instance presets. Francesco, I bust you on this one. I put this in there for you. But yeah, we have some proposed sort of thinking afoot. Was wondering if you could comment on that.
I think Francesco is not here this and probably next week.
I think he was on the attendees list. Anywho, I can comment on that briefly if he's not here.
That he was here. Okay, but
Me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
A little bit louder if possible.
Okay. Sorry. So, hi everyone. I posted indeed a PR, a couple of PRs, and filled an issue to track what's going on. And me and Martin, we are experimenting still at the Virt profiles daemon, so we are deep in design phase. But one of the concerns I have is the overlap between Virt profiles and current presets, which we will totally have some overlap in my opinion. So those patches are an attempt to see how we can solve this overlap and see how the two features can coexist. And I'm not looking for a merge. What I'm trying to do is to demonstrate with code and not just with words in English how it could look. So people, please comment, even if you can say, no, this is not going to fly because, that's okay. I just need that because, and that's it.
Awesome, thank you. Quick note on Kubernetes 111 and Multis. Sebastian?
Can you hear me?
yes.
So, okay, now I have a problem using the provider .111.0. There is a problem that was in Kubernetes. We need to rebuild this provider. The problem was when I tried to run again the make cluster sync, it can delete the Virt handler and can delete the API aggregation of the Virt API resource we have. The problem was fixed by Kubernetes. They have a problem with the finalizing in the pod and the configuration. So we just need to rebuild it. I will push a PR because we need to do one more thing. We need to change the way we are cleaning the environment, we first need to delete the PVC we create, and after that delete the PV, because if we try to delete the PV first, it just stuck in deleting mode until you remove the PVC. It's something new in Kubernetes 1.11.
Awesome, thank you. Captured all that. Archim, you had made a note about the mutating webhooks.
Just a second, if I can just hijack this, Sebastian, because the important thing for me is not the problems with the Kubernetes 3.11, but the fact that we are advancing really well with Multus, which is in some way competing the device plugin way to connect layer 2 networks to a pod, and makes the previous discussion a bit moot if this is a good and acceptable solution. This is another thing that might be worth a discussion here, because in my opinion, the architecture of this is better than placing too much networking know-how into KubeVirt, because the main problem that I see in Roman's approach is that it is tied very tightly to QEMU, and very much everything that we do applies to other nice tenants of the Kubernetes world. And Multus is a way that is like we just consume something that OpenShift and Intel is developing, and not inventing something that is unique to KubeVirt.
So device plugins are, at least the plan is that device plugins aren't unique to KubeVirt either, right? So my pull requests are mostly just trying to fill a gap between device plugins or Multus or whatever to the virtual machine when we're already in there. That's at least what I can say to that.
Okay. So maybe I misunderstood. I know that I don't really understand it, but I don't think that it is actually needed if we are using Multus. If we just don't, if we assume that all the needed bridges are there, and we don't care about, we assume that we can launch a schedule wherever we want.
So what I'm trying to close is the gap between there is Multus or device plugin or even an OCI hook. They can all bring devices or networks in whatever they like, right? So there are many different layers, possibilities. And then we have a device or an interface or even multiple devices, whatever, brought in there. And then we have the container in the pod, but we don't have it on the VM. And there is a gap then, how to connect it to QEMU with KubeVirt or on. And I am just interested in standardizing that gap for us. And before that, whatever community likes, whatever makes sense, whatever flies in KubeVirt or Kubernetes, sorry, like KubeVirt, is fine for me.
But Sebastian, do we actually need anything? I mean, special for that from KubeVirt, or for like what we call the binding mechanism, like that?
Exactly. What Roman does is to move the binding mechanism that we does in the Virt launcher to the Virt handler to do everything, and just give the virtual machine, just giving the interface on the, so the Virt launcher just going to put everything in the Virt XML, and that's it. That's all the logic it's going to do, and the logic it's moved to the Virt handler itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not adding new logic in that sense to the network use. Okay. It's just right now in Virt Launcher, and we're closing the gap in Virt Launcher.
That's the importance of using a common language. For us, we thought of a name of a binding mechanism, and if you're just taking the binding mechanism, that makes it much clearer to me.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and just a note, I think that is what we now see in the original network API document. The binding mechanism of connections back then really were not clear enough, and I think that is what we need to clarify. I didn't say something, I did not say anything valuable. Sorry.
Okay, sorry Stu for stealing your time. Bye.
Nope, it's important. Thank you. So if we're ready to move on, we'd like to talk about mutating webhooks. Archim.
So just short note, I started to work on mutating webhook, so we will move all defaults to mutating webhook, and I hope we also will drop preset controller, because less controllers easier to debug. So that's a short note.
Awesome, thank you. Captured that. Vladek, would you like to talk about your work with the CPU pinning?
Yeah, just a small heads up. In general, there is this PR that I started, pretty much works as it is. The only thing is missing is the validation and functional tests, which I'm currently working on, but the foundation is there, and I'm happy to get reviews.
Awesome. Thank you. And just 1 second, and unit tests. There we go. And so next, moving on to the open floor, there was a note a moment ago about architecture meetings, but I believe it's been deleted. Moving on to the KubeVirt release. When is the next one?
Yeah, so I think we can decide. We can do a quick, we can do a quick one this week. It should have been last week, but I was not available back then. So I'm happy to do one this week. Otherwise, we can skip this one and do it at the beginning of September. Does anybody have a concern of doing a release right now? Are there any big issues?
I don't know of any new ones.
Because
well, I would like to include also like boot order for interfaces, but
yeah,
but we can wait. We shouldn't block anything else.
Yeah, no, because then I would just do a quick release and we're good, and then we can continue to do pre-releases if we want to catch features.
There is one issue that I would prefer to see in, and that is pull request 1372. Let me grab the go over to chat. Put that in there. This one is basically just a small nit with respect to if you're under current framework, we automatically assign a ton device to every virtual machine as part of the pod networking. If you are opting to not use pod networking using the auto attached pod interface false, we still require a ton device using device plugins. In cases where we're trying to avoid device plugins altogether, that can break things, aka OpenStack or OpenShift Origin, excuse me, where we don't have operable device plugins. This might be helpful. Other than that, it's not a huge deal, but in some cases it might be.
I would do the release tomorrow morning. If it's get merged until then it will be in. Otherwise, not, I think. It doesn't look critical, just good. Yeah.
All right, and the next note, KubeCon North America, of course, the submission deadline is coming up August 12th. If anybody has anything that they would like to propose, it's now or never, basically. So good luck. And we have a couple action items that we captured, creating the design document for device plugin integrations and how we want that to work and look. And a follow-up with the KubeVirt operator framework team, just to get their perspective. Other than that, are there any other items for the open floor and or agenda items we've missed?
Just a quick one. I wondered if we want to try to get. No, I'll be sending out an email to the mailing list to ask whether we want to have a small meetup before KubeCon. The day before KubeCon is usually the ZIG day where ZIGs are meeting up to speak. But we are known, and maybe we even get a space there, and then would have an opportunity to get together, have some time to speak and discuss stuff. But that depends on the attendance of KubeVirt interested people. But I'll dispatch that to the mailing list as said. But this is just a disclaimer. It will come up.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, looks like we're under time. Thanks everybody for your attendance. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.